A rancher falls ill just before Christmas, and one woman's quiet kindness changes everything. Horses are fed, fires are lit, and a lonely heart begins to thaw. In the Wild West, even the smallest act can leave a legend. Winter had come early that year, the kind of early that felt personal, as if the wind had chosen this valley for its first cruel breath. Snow fell in quiet sheets, soft at first, then heavier, gathering on rooftops and fence rails like forgotten letters left unread. Out on the edge of town, where the lantern lights faded into the pale hush of open land, a ranch stood alone against the season. It looked tired in the way old guardians do, sturdy, but aching from too many years of holding on. And somewhere inside that cold December silence, a story waited to thaw. She walked into that winter with her shoulders squared against the world, though she tired of fighting it. A woman who had learned early that life did not soften simply because a soul needed gentleness. She worked wherever hands were wanted, scrubbing floors, hauling laundry, chopping vegetables behind the hotel kitchen where steam softened her hair and hid her sadness for a few borrowed minutes. Folks rarely said her name unless they needed something, and she never corrected anyone who spoke it wrong. Survival had taught her to save her breath. The town judged her without ever knowing her. Not cruelly, just thoughtlessly, the way people overlook a wildflower growing near the road, admiring the prettier ones in someone else's garden. She wasn't bitter about it. Maybe a little tired. Maybe more alone than she admitted, even to herself. But the quiet had become her companion, and in that quiet, she hid the softest parts of her heart where no one could bruise them again. There had been a man once, the kind she tried to believe in. A store hand who laughed easily and held her hand as if he meant it. He had seemed like a beginning, like maybe her life could unfold into something kinder. But when the hard months came and her pockets grew lighter, his smile grew thinner. He stopped walking her home, stopped asking how she was. One evening, under a dim lantern behind the general store, he looked at her with impatience sharp enough to be a blade and said she was too much for him. Too much work. Too much burden. Too much of everything he didn't want. She didn't argue. Didn't plead. She simply nodded, though the nod cracked something inside her. Then she walked away with her pride intact and her heart quieter than ever before. Winter had begun in her long before the snow arrived. It was around this time that she noticed the rancher more clearly. Not because he sought attention. In truth, he avoided it. He came into town only when necessary, speaking in soft tones that felt older than his years. People knew of him, not about him. A man carved from silence and long miles, with eyes that seemed to listen more than his mouth ever spoke. When he looked at her, it wasn't with longing or pity, but with a kind of old-fashioned respect that startled her. As though he saw her, without trying to claim her. She thought little of it at first. Some people simply carried gentleness, as naturally as other men carried pride. But a week before Christmas, the whispers began. The rancher hadn't been seen. No supplies taken home. No horses ridden out. The blacksmith mentioned he'd looked pale last time he passed through town. Feverish, perhaps. Folks shrugged. He was a solitary man. He would manage. She didn't shrug. Kindness was her instinct, the one part of herself the world had never managed to take. So one evening, with snow crunching under her boots and the sky darkening into a deep blue sorrow, she made the long walk to his ranch. She hesitated at the door, heart fluttering with uncertainty, then knocked softly. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. When she pushed the door open, it groaned tiredly, as though grateful someone had finally come. Inside, the air was cold, too cold. And in the back room, she found him. The rancher lay on his bed, fever burning him pale, his breath shallow, his strength nearly gone. His horses whinnied from the stable outside, restless and hungry, sensing that the hands that usually cared for them had fallen still. She stood there for a long moment, her breath trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of what she knew she had to do. Then she rolled up her sleeves and stepped inside his world, into the quiet of a ranch waiting for someone to save it. The snow pressed hard against the windows, the horses shifted, the wind whispered warnings. Yet something in the air had changed. Winter had met its match. Kindness had arrived. The first morning she returned to the ranch, dawn was still only a pale thought on the horizon. The world felt half asleep, wrapped in a hush that made every sound softer, as if winter itself held its breath to listen. Frost clung to the fence rails like delicate lace. The horses, sensing her footsteps, shifted in their stalls with soft, hopeful snorts. They remembered her gentleness from the night before. Animals often sense the truth of a person long before people did. She carried the feed pail slowly, her fingers numb, her breath leaving small ghosts in the frigid air. The horses leaned toward her, brushing their warm noses against her shoulder. She whispered to them the way one speaks to frightened children, calming their restlessness with tones rather than words. Their trust settled something deep inside her, something that had been loose and aching for years. Caring for them felt strangely like caring for parts of herself she had forgotten. Inside the ranch house, the rancher slept in an uneasy half-dream, fever still clinging to him like a shadow that refused to let go. She found him trying to sit up when she entered, but his arms trembled, and he fell back against the thin pillow. She hurried to his side, not speaking, just pressing a steadying hand to his shoulder. His skin was too warm, his breath too shallow. For a moment his eyes fluttered open, and he saw her, not in surprise, not in fear, but in quiet relief. She dipped a cloth into cool water and laid it across his forehead. He exhaled as though the world had been heavy on his chest, and she had just lifted a corner of it. No thanks were spoken. None were needed. Silence stretched between them, but not the cold kind. This was a soft silence, bruised but healing. She spent hours there, tending to small things he could no longer manage. She kept the fire burning low but steady, swept the kitchen floor, tightened a loose hinge on the back door, and checked the pantry shelves. Everything in the house spoke of a man who lived with quiet discipline, until illness had undone him. Even the dust felt apologetic. Each day became a rhythm. She would wake before the sun, cross the snowy field with the sky still dim, feed the animals, and slip into the house with the lightest steps. She moved gently, as though she were afraid to disturb the memories that lived in the walls. She left soup by his bedside, changed his water, then went about fixing what needed fixing. Sometimes she caught him watching her from half-open eyes, never speaking, simply observing, as though he were memorizing the shape of her kindness. She pretended not to notice, but a warmth would rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. When she returned to town in the evenings, people began to look at her differently. Some curious, some suspicious. A woman disappearing into a sick man's ranch each day stirred tongues even in the gentlest towns. She felt their glances follow her, but she ignored them. She had long stopped caring what people assumed. Only kindness mattered, and he needed hers. One night, as wind rattled the windows and the cold clawed its way through the cracks, she found him trying once more to rise. He failed. The effort left him shaken, his breath uneven. She knelt beside him and adjusted the blanket at his shoulders. He looked at her then, truly looked, as if searching her eyes for something he couldn't speak aloud. Neither of them said anything. Words would have broken the fragile truth between them. Hours slipped by. Snow thickened outside. The lamp cast a dim amber glow across his tired face. She rose to check the window, pressing a blanket over the draft that seeped in. When she turned back, he was awake, watching her in that quiet way of his. Their eyes met, time stretched, tender and trembling. It was not romance, not longing, not anything the world would rush to label. It was simply recognition, two worn souls acknowledging each other's wounds without touching them. The town might talk. Snow might fall harder. Winter might try to take what it could. But inside that small ranch house, something gentle had begun to thaw. By the time the third week of December settled over the valley, the ranch felt different, as though her presence had quietly rewritten the air inside it. The fever no longer held him as tightly. His strength returned in small, careful pieces, like sunlight inching its way back after a long night. One morning, when she arrived with frost still clinging to her lashes, she found him sitting up on the edge of the bed, breathing slow but steady. His boots rested on the floor beside him, untouched, a symbol of the life he was impatient to step back into. She froze in the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or turn away. He noticed her and offered the faintest smile, tired but genuine. The kind of smile a man gives when he's grateful simply to see another day. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it to him silently, expecting to leave him to rest. But he gestured toward the chair near the window, asking her to stay without saying a word. She sat. The quiet between them felt warm, like the first gentle breeze after a storm. He sipped his coffee slowly, gathering his breath. She could see the effort it took just to hold the cup steady. Illness had carved new shadows into his face, softened the hard lines she had always noticed from afar. He didn't try to hide his weakness. In fact, he seemed oddly unashamed of it before her, as though he trusted her with the fragile edges of himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from days of silence. He asked why she kept coming. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the frost gathering on the window, at the horses stirring in the barnyard, and at the bruised sky hinting at more snow. Then she spoke softly, saying that no one deserved to face winter alone. Not him. Not anyone. He listened in that old, patient way he had, the way that told a person their words mattered more than the noise of the world. She told him about the man who had once held her heart only to toss it aside when life became inconvenient. Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She simply spoke because he made the air feel safe enough to fill with truth. When she finished, he lowered his gaze, his fingers trailing the chipped rim of the cup. He admitted that he had built his life alone out of fear, not preference. Fear of loss, fear of needing someone, fear of offering a heart that might not be received gently. The admission surprised her. Men like him rarely bared such quiet vulnerabilities. For a long while, neither spoke. The wind pressed against the walls like a restless traveler seeking shelter. Somewhere outside, a lone horse whinnied, the sound low and searching. And in that moment, they both felt it. The shift, the thaw, the fragile blooming of something neither fully understood. As the day stretched on, she mended his jacket by the fire, stitching each tear with careful hands. When she returned it to him, he traced the seams with a kind of reverence, as though her kindness had become part of the fabric. Later, when she prepared to leave, she found a small wooden horse on the table. Carved from cedar, smooth, simple, crafted with quiet care. He didn't explain it. He didn't need to. The gift said everything he could not. Then came Christmas Eve, wrapped in a storm that swallowed the mountains whole. Snow came hard, the wind howled, and the path home vanished. She stood at the door, realizing she was stranded. He looked at her with concern that held no hesitation. She stayed. There was no other choice. They sat by the fire, wrapped in the glow of flickering ember light. They shared stories in soft fragments, moments from their pasts, that still lived like ghosts in their bones. He told her about the loneliness he had mistaken for strength. She told him about the dreams she had folded away because no one ever asked about them. The storm outside raged, but the silence between them turned warm. At some point, he reached for her hand, slow, gentle, unsure. And when she didn't pull away, something inside both of them settled, like snow landing softly on still earth. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that felt just as rare. The storm had barely loosened its grip on the valley when trouble found its way to the ranch. Morning light crept in pale and uncertain, glinting off snowdrifts piled so high they looked like frozen waves. She stepped outside to feed the horses, her breath rising in soft plumes, when she heard the crunch of boots cutting through the brittle quiet. She turned, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a stranger seeking shelter, but the sight that met her made her heart fold into itself. It was the store hand, the man who once held her hand as if he meant forever, now wearing the same impatient expression he had the night he discarded her. His coat was dusted with snow, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with something sourer than anger. He walked toward her like someone who believed the world owed him answers. She stood her ground. The horses grew restless behind her, shifting with uneasy snorts. He didn't greet her, didn't offer warmth or concern. Instead, he demanded to know why she had been staying at the ranch, why she was ruining her name, why she would choose to care for a man who had nothing to offer her. His voice carried a bitterness that echoed through the cold morning air. She did not raise her voice in return. She simply told him this wasn't his concern anymore. But he stepped closer, grabbing her arm with the same entitled grip he had once used to claim affection. The pressure was not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her of every moment she'd felt small beside him. The horses reacted, tossing their heads, hooves stamping nervously in the snow. The rancher appeared in the doorway, pale but standing firm. His breath was shallow, his strength not fully restored, yet he walked toward them with slow, steady purpose, like a man facing down a storm he refused to fear. He placed himself between them, without force, just presence, a quiet wall of resolve. His voice, still scratched by fever, carried a weight that cut through the cold. He told the store hand to leave, calmly, firmly, not to protect territory, but to protect her. The store hand scoffed, bristling with wounded pride. He opened his mouth to argue, but the moment shattered when one of the horses panicked. A loud crack split the air as the fence behind them buckled under the weight of a frightened mare that surged forward, eyes wide with instinctive terror. The snow beneath her churned like white dust as she bolted. The store hand lunged forward, foolishly trying to prove something. Bravery or worth or desperation, she couldn't tell. But the mare reared high, hooves slicing the air with wild fear. In a heartbeat, she saw what would happen. She rushed to him, grabbing his coat and yanking him aside with all the strength she had. They tumbled into the snow just as the mare thundered past, sending cold wind whipping over their faces. He stared at her, stunned, his bravado crumbling like thawing ice. Without a word, he scrambled to his feet, brushing snow off his coat with trembling hands. Embarrassment burned in his eyes. Humiliation, too. He muttered something that dissolved in the air and then turned away. This time, when he walked, he didn't look back. The valley swallowed him slowly as he disappeared down the white-covered path. She sat back on her heels, breath trembling, the cold seeping through her clothes. The rancher was beside her in moments, lowering himself carefully into the snow despite his weakness. He placed a steady hand at her back, warm even through his shaking. Concern softened the tired lines of his face. For a long moment, neither moved. The world was silent again, the danger past, the morning washed clean. When she finally looked up, he was studying her with an expression she had never seen before, not gratitude, not surprise, but something deeper, something that felt like the truth he had been carrying quietly for days. She whispered that she was fine, but he shook his head gently, as if the words she offered weren't the ones that mattered. His voice cracked when he told her he didn't want her to leave when the snow melted, that the ranch felt different with her in it, that he felt different. He said it as if it frightened him, but also freed him. Her breath caught. Not because she needed saving, she had saved herself many times, but because this was the first time someone wasn't asking her to be less. He was inviting her to be exactly who she was. She leaned into him, her forehead touching his shoulder, the weight of the moment settling tenderly between them. His arm came around her slowly, carefully, like he was holding something precious. And in that quiet embrace, with snow glittering around them and the valley hushed as if listening, they both understood that winter had not brought an ending. It had brought a beginning. A gentle reminder to anyone who hears their story. That kindness is never small. That love grows in the softest places. And that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the quiet of a cold December morning.